It's right here, ladies and gentlemen. Please applaud. Lei is here with you. Thank you. A big round of applause.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. As she said, my name is Lee Quinn. I'm a CoinDesk reporter in New York. And before we even get started, I wanted to take a little bit of a poll of the audience by show of hands. Who here today owns a little bit of Bitcoin? All right. Who here today feels confident they have a good understanding of what blockchain even means? Sure. Okay. So luckily we have some panelists here today that can help us dig even deeper. I'm gonna take a seat over here, guys. We've got Bobby Batista, who's co-founder of a crypto startup called Good Money. We've got Eyal Herzog, who's from Bancor. We've got, wow, so many good people here. We have Anna, who is from the blockchain group in the Netherlands, Deloitte, right? Awesome, yeah. We've got Jeff Pulver, who is VP of Alchemist. And we have John I'm going to mispronounce this one too. Callion, yeah. John Callion, who's from Deutsche Telekom. So let's start by going down the line. And can each of you guys tell me in just 3 sentences what it is that interests you about blockchain for your specific projects and sector? Want to start us off, Bobby?
Sure. Well, I mean, for me, blockchain is about transparency and security. It's just this kind of a new way of being able to move information, whether that's money or data or anything really, from place to place, person to person, in a way that is smart, programmable, and like the applications of that are just inspiring to me in general.
Awesome. Eyal, why is blockchain interesting for you and the problems that your project is starting to solve?
So the most interesting thing for me when I look at blockchain, and I was here when the internet started, and it was the first decentralized network. And even though it wasn't clear why a decentralized network is better than all the existing network, everyone understands it today. And blockchain is essentially a decentralized database. And even though it's not very easy to kind of figure out all the ways that it can be useful, we see today with assets and currencies, I believe that decentralized database technology would completely change the landscape of the technology that as we see today, because we will have less and less proprietary database, which is the player that control the market today.
Awesome.
Yeah, thank you. So, at Telecom, quite a large enterprise, we're always looking for new ways, new ways to build faster, better, stronger, more secure software systems. So we look at this technology, blockchain or distributed ledger technology, as another tool that we have to build software systems, to power our networks, amongst other things. So it's a very pragmatic approach to, can we actually do something meaningful with this technology?
Yeah, so for me, I think blockchain is really about decentralization. And for Deloitte as a company, we advise our clients. So going from very centralized systems to decentralized systems for enterprise, that's definitely a challenge. So yeah, we keep track of everything and trying to actually help them make that transformation. And I think moving there, also with enterprise, that's very interesting. But from a personal perspective, I really like the opportunity of opening these new business models. Yeah.
So personally, as much as we don't talk about TCP/IP publicly anymore because we take it for granted, I believe that what blockchain represents is a TCP/IP for the future. And that what you're seeing in blockchain really is that deep, and there'll be OSs and many things in ASICs where this stuff you take for granted, and what we're looking at is something way beyond that. But so we have metaphors rather than reality. So for me, what we're seeing is the dawn of a new era, which we don't know the name of it yet, which we'll call it the blockchain era. But it's truly not that interesting to always just talk about a protocol. But that's where we're at. I mean, I still happen to be a fan of Telnet and Pine and Oasis and Gopher, but who cares? But we're at the level right now where people overhype and misunderstand everything. Personally, though, I enjoy creating programmable securities due to the fact that the securities will trade on a blockchain, and being able to, for the first time ever in the history of capital markets, create instruments which help companies optimize their own ecosystems. And for that, I'm really excited about.
Awesome. So something you mentioned is trying to get like beyond that protocol level, right? Eyal, can you tell me a little bit about some of the token projects that Bancor has been working with that have already delivered real results for some of their users, or will be in the very near future?
So I think there are very few ICOs or projects that have released a working product. I mean, Bancor itself is one of those few. We are today guaranteeing liquidity for more than 120 different tokens on our network using a system which is an alternative to exchanges. And as we know them, with the bid, ask, and the order book, we created a different system, and it already had more than $1.5 billion of volume of people converting currency one to another. One of the interesting project that I think you can see today also on the Bancor network is DAI by a company called MakerDAO. This is one of the earliest players. They started actually a few years ago, and it's a stable token. It's always worth $1, but interestingly, it's not like Tether. They don't have dollars in the bank. It is using Ether as collateral, and they're doing it in a smart way that would make sure that no one will kind of lose their dollars if they hold DAI. So this is a very interesting project, because if you think about it, almost all the financial transactions today in the world, all the money transactions are done with stable coins. If it's not a stable coin, it's a speculative tool, and people don't circulate those. They buy them, they sell them, but they don't circulate them. Most of the activities with stable coins, so I see a lot of future for such projects.
That's really interesting. Do you know how it is that people are using MakerDAO tokens? There's this stable coin.
The MakerDAO is actually the organization, so the decentralized organization. The stable token is DAI, D-A-I. And one way to use it is if you think that crypto is going down, you buy that, and then you don't go down with it because your coin's worth $1. But in general, every time we do commerce and when we do lending, we need a stable coin. Only for financial investment we can deal with all kind of assets that are not stable in price. But for the most common use, that is what you need, and DAI is today essentially a hedging tool more than other things, but I see more and more usage for this thing as payment, because if you can trust this money to be stable, then it can truly be an alternative to a bank account without the speculative assets of Bitcoin going up or down or Ether. When you're using a stable coin, you can know that if you had $1,000 today, you'll have $1,000 tomorrow.
Jeff, I know that you work with projects across the space, and what gives money its value generally is what backs it, right? So a coin is stable if we believe that the United States government is stable, and that's why the dollar is stable. So allowing that liquidity into fiat or into something that is tangible, like a good or service, can go a long way to creating value. What projects have you seen so far that are creating tangible results for their users, and what do those results look like?
So unlike everyone else on the panel, it's sort of like there are two worlds within inside of blockchain. The era prior to 2018 and the post world. The world where people actually had used synonyms like projects, where it was more like, I've done over 400 early stage investments in my life, and I invested in a lot of projects. Sometimes with two people in a garage, not even with a white paper. And sometimes they did really well, and sometimes they failed, but sometimes you learn from that failure. There was an era where people could actually do that and ask for money for the public, and some people gave money to that. The world I'm working in today is more of a world where I'm dealing with institutional investors, people that represent collectively over $3 trillion looking to put money into assets called securities. And so I look for companies that are about to go public, but want to perhaps be thought leaders in terms of going and creating an instrument which empowers their ecosystem to invest and support them. I also look for companies that are late stage investments, where they're Series C or Series D venture, we take those folks. So I'm looking for people with actual revenue, we have products, they have an ecosystem, they have customers, they have communities. And these are people which are, whether they're at $100 million run rate, $35 million run rate, we have one at 55. We look for people that are going to be those standout projects, which then it's clear, because used to be, when your company went public, the best they could ever do is give a dividend. We're offering opportunities for companies who want to go this route to incentivize not only by taking top line, like a percentage of, say, adjusted gross revenue, but also to create investments opportunities so that if you hold on to the token, that you get perhaps discounts from services, or if you pay with it, perhaps you're going to get a discount on what you're doing. But we create incentives to hold, and this gives people an edge.
Security token?
Yes. So in other words, if you were a publicly traded company yesterday and you're Apple, the best in Apple, it may outperform the market. If Eyal has a company in the same ecosystem, and he can actually put incentives in his ecosystem to support him, he could actually perhaps outperform you. And so it's going to be a race toward understanding what programmable securities do, and this is not even dealing with derivatives. So when I look at companies, I look for real-world companies that are actually want to take that chance about being and providing thought leadership. We have 126 years of experience with stock markets. The markets we're looking to is 24/7 forever, not geographic, but with the opportunity to be responsive, and it changes everything. We're dealing inside the law. Most people don't realize that murder and SEC and the discovery of SEC felonies have one thing in common, and that there's no statute of limitations. And there will be projects, some very renowned projects, that one day we'll find out that they violated the law when it happened, and there could be rescission. So if you raised $12 million 4 years ago, and that $12 million is now worth $148 million, you have to return the $148 million. And people go to jail, and people do these. So
I'm hearing from you that one of the ways that the token projects that you work with have value is through the standard regulation that is already familiar to us.
Understood. I'm pushing for the Digital Securities Act of 2021 so that we don't deal with 1933 and 1934 for the rest forever. Yeah. The Jobs Act kind of set us to understand what we can do with crowd sales and crowdfunding, and it's a start. I think Reg A Plus for certain deals looks really promising, as well as Reg D and Reg S.
Hold on. Does anybody in this room actually know what Reg A Plus means? Awesome. So for the rest of us, those are American regulations defining how companies can and can't raise money. He's mentioned also the Jobs Act, which was put forward by the Obama administration, and an upcoming piece of regulation that would more clearly define how it is companies can raise money with these kinds of digital assets.
With certainty rather than uncertainty. I have a trade association we started which lobbies, and so we're waiting to understand whether or not the CFTC.
The thing is, this doesn't have a lot to do with blockchain, or the technology.
When
you talked about how there's like this side doing this and this side doing that, I would probably try to convince you it's more about those of us concentrating on trying to enhance and mature the technology for its usefulness versus how do you invest in startups. Very different conversation.
About
right?
The way that regulation
ICOs
applies.
are kind of cool. It's great that the nerds figured out how to raise their own money. That's my own way of looking at it. Most of those projects, though, are not working out. I think some of us, though, feel like it's really about the technology, right?
And I think that's great to have diverse opinions on the panel about, ICOs are clearly a very controversial topic, and there's all kinds of blockchain solutions and applications that actually don't even have anything to do with payments or fundraising. Bobby, I know that you're really passionate about scaling solutions and how we can get blockchain applications to scale. Do you have any thoughts about second layer solutions like the Lightning Network?
Well, sure. The base layer, you're trying to scale things like Ethereum or Bitcoin as a blockchain, and the second layer solutions are things that kind of happen off chain that can then go back and get the okay from the main chain. And in either case, they work together. If you get a 10x gain somehow through sharding or splitting work up across many different nodes to run in parallel, that's great. And then if you also got a 10x boost from something like a payment channels system, those come together. Now you've got a 100x gain. And so regardless of how we get to these higher levels, like we're orders of magnitude away from where we need to be in terms of transactions per second. Like the speed of these things is unusable. And On the other end of that, like when we do get to these points of having the scalability that we need, it doesn't matter unless somebody's using it. And so that's why there's this really great chicken and egg thing here about like building applications that will work once these things can support them.
Anna, I know that you're really passionate about figuring out what makes a project feasible. So when we think about scaling solutions and sharding and these kinds of issues, and you're looking at ways that these projects can move forward into having real results for people, how do you evaluate what makes something feasible or how to test it and go forward from there?
Yeah, I think so. In general, when we talk to clients, first we start with, ideally we would start with a feasibility study. There's a lot of clients coming like we want to build a POC, which is fine, but that's not testing it in real life and seeing how it actually works. So now we're trying to move away from just doing POCs, doing feasibility studies, which is on the one hand really looking at cooperating with consortium partners, and on the other hand is looking at the technical side, like what is it actually that you need? And what you see in the enterprise world is that most of them are not looking at public, so that takes a little bit away of the scalability issues, but it's definitely something from our team's perspective we're very much focused on, because layer 2 solutions to scaling are just necessary for any solution. And I think within enterprise it's not so much necessarily focused on payments as on, for example, documents in supply chains, or just transfer of data in general as a means of transferring value, but you still need to have this throughput. And on the main chain, you cannot do that with also the transaction fees. Like if you want to transfer a document and it costs you 25 cents even a document, it's way too much.
You mentioned something that I want to touch on there, but first I want to make sure everyone in the audience is with us. Has anyone here ever heard of the Lightning Network before, or sharding? Wow, okay, that's impressive. For the rest of anyone who also, like me, is learning, we're always learning in this space, I would describe the Lightning Network as if the bottom layer of the Bitcoin blockchain is the first floor. The Lightning Network is like a stairs, so you can get up and down faster and cheaper. And Ethereum, which is a different crypto project, has a very different approach to the way it's going to deal with that traffic, right? If you have a lot of people trying to come in the front door and you need a stairs so that you can have much faster and cheaper transactions, as she was mentioning. Another thing you mentioned there was transferring between private blockchains and public blockchains, and that those roads in between. I understand, John, that your project works with interlopability in terms of looking at how an infrastructure could include or be accessible with Bitcoin, Ethereum, IOTA. Even for, it's obvious like why payments, that's useful, right? We want to be able to transfer from one currency into another. But for different kinds of enterprise solutions, like telecom is working on, can you tell me a little bit about why the interlopability is still such an important focus for you?
We don't know yet which of these networks will actually work over time. We don't know if we can trust these public networks, right? There's one technology called IOTA, which is supposed to be for IoT devices. But you know, it's a 2-year-old technology, and is a company like ours or our partners going to run multi-million-dollar, high-throughput production systems on top of that? The answer is no today. Nor will we run it on Bitcoin or Ethereum or some other public networks. We are also experimenting with private things, Fabric and some other, the Hyperledger, open source projects. But really it's about exploration for us and mixing and matching. Maybe you want to store some transactions on Bitcoin or Ethereum. Maybe you want to think about where do you put a smart contract. And so our thinking is really about how could we mix and match all of these for large scale enterprise software design? And how can we mitigate against how young and nascent this technology is today?
Hey, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, for those of us in the audience that are old enough, this might sound familiar. You know, back in 2000, after the internet stocks has crashed, and the dot-com CEO was, prejudiced. You know, it's a bad word. A bit like a lot of people look at ICOs today, even though these dot-com CEOs built the apparently biggest companies in the world today, at least in terms of market cap. And back at that time, everyone would also talk about, oh, you know, the internet is just a fad, but there's the intranet, is the enterprise. That's where it is. So, you know what I think about that? I think that enterprises would do anything that would improve their ROI and their cost, and that's very smart and very sensible. But it is the internet that changed the world, not the intranet.
But I think back in that time, and I was born, but I wasn't really, aware of it. But that's actually sort of an evolution process, and it's the same with innovation. Like, you don't immediately have the end product; you have to go through these cycles. And I'm on the same page with John. Like, a lot of our clients, they just don't want to go public straight away. Like, they might, and often in the roadmap it might be somewhere later, but there's an exploration phase, seeing what breaks, what stands, how do we deal with this, and then actually, it's an iterative process, much like innovation.
I agree. It was back then the same thing. It was the new companies that were born on the internet that changed the world, not the enterprises that adopted it.
Just a quick note, it can take 7 years for a piece of technology to work its way into production at a telco. You might argue we're in year 3 with blockchain technology.
Yeah, that is a really interesting argument. Where did you judge that 3 from?
Sorry?
Where did that 3 start in your mind?
Probably when I can trace back when people like me started paying attention to the technology.
All right.
Right?
That's an interesting, yeah.
Which is about 3 years ago. I'm not the only one like me working at a big enterprise, though, right? There's quite a few of us, and we have a lot of probably clients we work with in the same, and they are on the same technology roadmap as well.
So, given that we're still really early on in this technology, I'd love to go through the panel and have each of us say a project that we respect because it's been able to produce real results for its users, whether that be Bitcoin or whether that be an equity token or whether that be really any project across the space. It could even be a blockchain ID. And so could you go ahead and start us off, Bobby, about a project you like and what results look like to you for that project?
I mean, I guess the obvious one is to start with Bitcoin. It's changed everything. It's brought this to the minds of the world. And really, I think that as we're orders of magnitude away from the amount of people that we need using this to have it be stable enough that people would consider this the thing that people want to stabilize to instead of a fiat currency. And I think that these stable tokens are a good stopgap between now and then, because I mean, it's doing this all the time. We can't use it to transact. But in the meantime, it's kind of redefining what stores of value are, what they look like, and making people think about what money is. And it's just kind of started this whole idea of networks and how to get people to behave in the way that you want them to in a network.
Just also, as a reminder, Bitcoin itself is not quite 10 years old yet. So you were saying, like, we're still that's the invention, not even the use. So we're very, very early on in terms of blockchain use cases and solutions. Eyal, did you have an idea?
So, first of all, I agree on both your points. I think the use case for Bitcoin was black markets, and that was because it was permissionless money. So it didn't give a lot of good name for Bitcoin, but that was I couldn't say legitimate use, but a use. And I do agree with stablecoins as being the next frontier to open up the markets to many more uses. I think that obviously Ethereum did great by allowing anyone to issue their own crypto asset in a fairly simple way, and obviously that had huge effects on the industry, probably more effect than everything we experienced before. And the project I'm currently excited about is actually EOS. And the reason I'm excited about EOS is because I used it. And I recommend that to everyone here, because it's not quite the same when you use a blockchain, even for a simple betting app like a rolling dice, and you see the transaction being completed within a second. This is actually it's important more. It's like the first time you transfer money in Bitcoin, you feel something, you experience something. When you have a 1-second transaction, I think it opens up the market for decentralized application that I don't think going to take off on Ethereum, because it's usually much longer to complete a transaction.
That's why those scaling solutions we were talking about, sharding or building that second layer on the network, are so important for things like Ethereum, because they definitely are much slower than projects like EOS today. I hear you there.
I like the Sovereign Foundation, also known as Hyperledger Indy. It's a network created by Evernym, a firm out of Salt Lake City. Deutsche Telekom is participating in the Sovereign Foundation. It's a permissioned, closed network. Why I like it, it's about identity. And like the internet, for me, in my opinion, changed commerce across the world. I think evidenced by Amazon's market cap this week. I think ultimately identification is what's really going to radically change for humans and technology. And so I'm most interested to see how this evolves. Can we start getting some universal identification where we all take control of our identification and our data? That's most interesting to me.
Yeah, I totally, I love identity as a case. I think the self-sovereign identity on blockchain is brilliant. I also think it's very complex. But one of the cases that I wanted to mention that I really like, so I work mostly with enterprise cases, and there's a case by WFP where they actually used the blockchain to transfer vouchers to refugees in Jordan. I think they did over 100,000 transactions right now, and so they basically decrease cost, but that's also, I think, maybe a stepping stone to giving people more control over, in this sense, their data. So especially with identity, that's the same, being able to control your data. But again, I think that's a very, very complex, very interesting, but very complex case.
So most of the projects I'm involved in that I really, really like, I can't talk about. I did recently file some patents for some OSS systems for using blockchain and telecom, which we could talk about off panel. But I think the idea overall of bringing integrity and trust back to business at a high level, and knowing that in the future, because we lost trust, right? And fake news happened because we lost trust. And being able to leverage the virtue and values of identity, trust, and other things associated with blockchain so that in the future we could trust again and do business, if you will, with trustless environments, as long as we don't break the cornerstone of it, changes everything. And at a high level, I think it brings integrity back and helps leverage the growth of where we go. And for that, I'm incredibly excited.
So is there a project that you can name that you feel has delivered results already? And if so, what do those results look like to you?
I'm going to sound incredibly biased because they happen to be a client of mine, so no. I'll just say that the results are that they're working with governments today in helping to roll out national identities. And they're working with large, actually enterprises too, to help at least identify certain core solutions. But the fundamental result, there are a lot of solutions, not just one, it's many. It's like, usually in history, we have not one idea, but the same idea happens in multiple places, and you solve for it. So I'm a fan of the solutions rather than be biased just because one client is doing it.
Gotcha. Bobby, did you also have some thoughts you wanted to add about blockchain IDs in particular and those kinds of applications?
Blockchain ID, wow. You mean like the applications of it, or the projects in the space, or
projects you've heard about that use it, or ways that it could be useful in terms of different applications you've heard about, or maybe
like a really simple and cute way that I saw it used. I think it was Civic that did this. Yeah. We were at a conference and they had this booth where they were handing out free beer, but you had to validate your age with your Civic app. And so that means they don't need to know my name, my birth date, my address, my organ donor status. They don't need to know anything about me. The computer will tell them, yes or no, is he eligible to be here? And that was kind of a cool experience. And I can imagine that being the case at an airport. Just, am I ticketed for this flight? Am I eligible to be here? Yes. And then you just go. And I think that it's really cool that I get to opt in to what information I share.
Was there anything anyone else wanted to add about blockchain IDs in particular? Or also supply chain management solutions, other kinds of applications that are not crypto or payments?
Yeah, no, so I thought one more thing about ID. I think what you see with ID now in the space is that there's a lot of startups working on it, and there are several like Civic and Uport and Sovereign, and there are other ones as well. But as you actually start to bring that to the masses, it gets really complex because there's a big issue with liability. So normally it's a government who gives out an identity, and so if there would be another party doing that and something goes wrong, and there are many exceptions that you have to think about in the design, and there's very little margin to fail in practice. And another problem is that nobody wants to pay for it. So it's yeah, it's the government, and that's basically the only party really that will pay for an identity solution.
Yeah, that's completely true. In Germany, though, you're right, it's absolutely complex on identity. And how can you get governments and corporations and citizens to all participate together in parallel? There has actually been a consortium of blockchain people, though, have pushed forward their ideas into the government, which in this case has been willing to think about it. Because if you can get to the right people who have the headaches within government, I think you can start cracking the code there, right? I mean, they are already the central authority for the IDs of people within a country.
It's already so complex without blockchain itself.
It is. So where do we start?
Yeah.
I mean, one place to start is maybe with a university. You know, maybe their innovation group wants to think about the identification of students. At least you can prove out the technology. And while you're doing it, scream out to the government how it's working, hopefully.
Did you have something you wanted to add, or are you good? Baba. So we have a little bit of time if there's any questions in the audience. Did anyone have a question for one of our panelists? Because if not, I have lots. All right. If anybody, go for it. He has a microphone, I believe.
I don't know, maybe it's relevant or not, but what are your thoughts about Al-Qaeda and ISIS doing their own crowdfunding through blockchain and educating mass people, if they want to support them, they can do it by using digital coins, and they really send them how to do it and how to do it safe.
So what was the question for one of the panelists?
Yeah, what was was it a company or? I didn't
No,
catch who.
Al-Qaeda and ISIS are using blockchain to do crowdfunding for all of their terror attacks
You want some
in a
comments on
secured,
ISIS?
anonymous
Is
way.
this what I'm catching here?
So as somebody who spent a good deal of time researching online terrorist networks and the ways that they fund their projects, I promise you they are doing much more with the dollar than with Bitcoin, or any token for that matter, today at least. And luckily we have people who care a lot about regulation and working with governments. So my concerns related to ISIS and crypto are nil. My concerns related to crypto and usability are diverse.
It reminds us that they said the same thing about the internet. They said that now with the internet, all these terror cells group, they can communicate with each other freely using encrypted communication, and the world will see a wave of terror that never saw before. And they said that exactly at 9/11, you know, more or less. And so, yeah, but that's when the internet started. So I think with every new technology, we always see the problems that may arise from that technology because it removes all kind of limitation and censorships and all that. But it's usually harder for us to see all the good that it will provide in advance. This is something we usually, you know, find out as we move forward and learn about it.
I would just add that it's probably still the US dollar that dominates all the activity that's used on the black market or for nefarious reasons. It's very transportable and accepted everywhere. It's not so easy to convert an Ethereum token into cash, I think, for a lot of people in this world.
You also have a question?
Yes, my name is Amor, and I'm from the Philippines. We recently launched in the Philippines the first government-backed crypto hub in Asia called CESA, and we recently launched it in Tokyo. Obviously a lot of it is patterned after what's happening in Zug. I wanted to understand what the panel's take is on regulation, self-regulation, SROs, and all that boring stuff.
That's a very, very tricky question, so I'm going to make it harder. And I'm going to give you guys 3 sentences to answer what is it that you think is the most important takeaway when you consider regulation in the blockchain space. 3 sentences.
Thank you.
I would only say that it's like asking about content regulation on the internet. You know, we used to have content regulation before the internet. In Israel, we had like a censor with all the media and all around the world. The fact is that if you cannot regulate it technically, then it's kind of futile at the long term. So I think when on the blockchain age, regulation would be much harder to enforce. And I think that those who would insist to enforce regulation on the blockchain would see, those countries would see their economies decline in, if you compare it to countries that would just let the market do its thing. So and again, it's just like China trying to block content on the internet. Yes, they can do it. It's not very successful, not giving them a good reputation, but still they try. So we might see that on the blockchain. I don't think it will be successful.
Definitely more than 3. But I appreciate what you're getting at there, that regulation of content is not new, and we can apply the same lessons that we've learned about the infeasibility of that when we're trying to look at the blockchain space in general. Did you have something you wanted to add, Anna? Or Jeff?
I tend to think.
I'm sorry. I think my issue is basically preserving nascent technologies and letting them grow, and not putting in regulation that stops it from becoming what it could be. And so finding a balance between preserving the rights of investors, preserving ecosystems, so that in securities we have to deal with, it's a little different than communication law, but don't put in stumbling blocks so that the innovation stops. Because we are at the edge of the dawn of something which we all believe is very, very big. And to find governments, we're working in the United States with the state of Rhode Island, for example, and they're actually encouraging blockchain companies to go there, and they want to understand as a state, what could they do to bring people there? The state of Rhode Island. And so they want to bring jobs, blockchain jobs to Rhode Island, and they actually asked us to help influence that. So what we can do is do no harm, and certainly bad regulation creates a lot of harm. And so there's this balance between doing good and there are lots of places that will regulate because it's scary. But historically, I think if we can create an innovation hub and preserve the integrity of the future, that would be the best for everybody.
Awesome. John, did you have something you wanted to add?
Yeah, I was just going to say about monetary policy and the machinations of how monetary policy is enacted is controlled by governments and banks. I think cryptocurrencies are a very young competitor to that. I think that's how they see it today. Unfortunately, the technology is far ahead of the regulation, so it'll all catch up though.
Yeah, so I think it's one of the sort of main barriers that's often mentioned, like scalability and regulation, because if the regulation comes afterwards and it is bad regulation, then everyone gets screwed, and that is not what we want. So ideally we would get the regulators in the conversation and have them educated, and yeah, you hope for sensible regulation, but for a lot of companies it's good to know what the regulation will be, because it determines the playing field and it determines what they can and cannot do.
Was there one last question? I thought I saw a hand there that got skipped over. Okay.
I want to know whether Ayala Herzog will play a song afterwards.
Yeah, please. Among the talented panelists, you have somebody with special talent. So it's a huge request, but we want one little song on the piano. Okay?
All right.
Yeah, applaud the amazing panelist, Ayala Herzog. Let's do it.
They're at right now. Give it on up.
No pressure. All right, I'm gonna take this as our cue to leave the stage to our dashing performer. Thank you so much for joining us today for this conversation about blockchain.
Thank you, Lei.
Enjoy your time in Tel Aviv, everybody.